Consider a powerful, ambitious state initiating a massive transcontinental drive, utilizing decisive military technology to subdue, repress, and ultimately destroy local communities, populations already devastated by external contagions, in an aggressive push to claim a new ocean. This specific model of conquest, a dark, recurring pattern of territorial hunger and systemic violence, is conventionally associated with the American movement toward the Pacific. Yet, on the other side of the world, separated only by the frozen Bering Strait, an earlier, larger, and equally ruthless campaign unfolded. One that permanently established Russia as the world's most geographically expansive country. Today, we conduct a final, comprehensive investigation into a vital, yet frequently understated, global event. The centuries-long, relentless Russian campaign of subjugation across the challenging taiga and the unforgiving frozen tundra. Join us for this definitive historical account of the Russian conquest of Siberia. Siberia's sheer magnitude makes it almost impossible to comprehend. This enormous northern quadrant of Asia encompasses an astounding 13 million square kilometers of mountains, wetlands, and icy plains. To grasp the scale, this region alone makes up a remarkable 77% of the Russian Federation's total land area and sprawls across more than 17% of the Earth's entire surface. Siberia's notorious climate is defined by extreme cold, leading to its status as one of the planet's least populated areas today. Nevertheless, this formidable environment historically supported a rich tapestry of human cultures, sheltering dozens of distinct native Siberian nations who communicated using a wide variety of unique, unconnected languages. While their specific customs and spiritual beliefs were diverse, a fundamental nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle was common, centered on herding domesticated reindeer. These animals provided critical sustenance, meat, milk, and protective hide, and served as the only reliable transport across the snow-covered interior. Their spiritual world was steeped in deep animistic tradition, with respected shamans acting as essential intermediaries to the powerful spirits believed to dwell within the rivers and forests. Importantly, this remote land was never truly isolated. Over the long span of history, numerous powerful equestrian invaders from the vast Eurasian steppe, including the Scythians, the Turkic Khanate, and the powerful armies of Chinggis Khan, rode north to claim temporary control. However, the single most consistent economic motivation that repeatedly drew external powers into Siberia's interior was its abundant furs. The thick, soft, and exceptionally luxurious pelts from northern mammals like the sable, lynx, and Arctic fox were prized globally, both for their practical warmth and as potent symbols of prestige. By the zenith of the Mongol Empire, Siberian furs were the recognized currency of nobility across the entirety of Asia. It was this intensely lucrative fur trade that ultimately attracted the focused, imperial ambition of the emerging European power destined to permanently control Siberia, the Muscovite state. Centuries before a unified Russian state was crowned, the people who would become the Russians were geographically aware of the immense territory bordering their eastern lands. Long before the Tsardom was established in Moscow, the medieval Slavic merchant republic of Novgorod launched expeditions beyond the Ural Mountains, specifically to harvest animal pelts. By the 11th century CE, Novgorodian agents were making deep, violent incursions into western Siberia along the great river Ob. They labeled this eastern frontier the Land of the Yugor, a collective term encompassing various indigenous groups, including the Khanty, Mansi, Komi, and Samoyeds. These early Novgorodian raids were invariably characterized by extreme violence, their aim being to coerce the local population into delivering tribute payments solely in furs. This initial approach sadly established the brutal, systematic template for the massive imperial expansion that Moscow would later undertake. The local Uralic warriors, utilizing spears, powerful longbows, and sometimes protected by early chainmail, proved to be fierce, tenacious defenders. They successfully annihilated several Novgorodian detachments and, although sometimes paying tribute, managed to prevent total military defeat. However, the conclusive, complete conquest of Siberia was simply postponed, waiting until the 16th century and the full political and military centralization of the Tsardom of Russia. A pivotal shift in geopolitical power occurred in 1480, when the Grand Duchy of Moscow finally shed the last traces of Mongol suzerainty and immediately initiated a wave of relentless military campaigns that brought all northern Rus princedoms under its single, centralized command. In 1547, the ruler known to history as Ivan IV the Terrible formally claimed the title of Tsar, a crucial step that significantly elevated his standing among European rulers. Driven by a powerful desire for regional dominance, the new Russian state dedicated its founding years to conquering the influential Turco-Mongol Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, successfully annexing the entire strategically vital Volga region. This victory secured an open, unhindered route directly to the Urals and the untold riches of furs that lay beyond. As Russia's gaze turned decisively eastward, they confronted an established, powerful Islamic state. The Khanate of Sibir, founded in 1468 by Kipchak Turks, fleeing the breakdown of the Golden Horde, uniquely held the distinction of being the northernmost Islamic state in recorded history. Despite its extreme distance from major Muslim centers, Sibir was a developed power. Its key fortresses housed substantial mosques, and the state maintained extensive commercial and cultural pathways to grand Central Asian cities like Bukhara and Samarkand. Recognizing the grave Russian threat, Siberian Khan Yedigar made the strategic, pragmatic decision to acknowledge Russian suzerainty, agreeing to pay a large annual tribute of 1,000 sable skins. This fragile peace was abruptly ended in 1573 when Yedigar was overthrown by Kuchum Khan, a dynastic rival who immediately defied Moscow by ending the vassalage arrangement. This open challenge necessitated a forceful military response, but Russia was tied up in the exhausting Livonian War and lacked the necessary forces for an expedition into Siberia. Ivan the Terrible thus delegated the task to the Stroganovs, a powerful family of merchant lords with vast holdings on the eastern frontier. He granted them a special license to raise a private military force to conquer the lands east of the Urals. Eager for both land and profit, the Stroganovs hired a notorious Cossack bandit named Yermak to lead the invasion, offering the hardened outlaw a complete pardon in exchange for his service. In 1581, Yermak began his arduous campaign into Siberia along the Tagil and Tura rivers, commanding a group of approximately 1636 trained men. Armed with revolutionary muskets, a massive advantage over an enemy that possessed no gunpowder weaponry, Yermak's Cossacks fought their way to the Khan's capital, decisively crushing a far larger Siberian army during the pivotal three-day bloody Battle of Chuvash Cape. While subsequent, scattered resistance required another decade to fully subdue, the Yermak expedition achieved the fundamental imperial goal: the swift, complete, and permanent annexation of the Khanate of Sibir into the growing Tsardom of Russia. With the Khanate neutralized, the Russians launched an uninterrupted, rapidly accelerating march toward the east. This entire operation was motivated solely by the relentless pursuit of new, ever-richer sources of valuable furs, driving the troops across thousands of kilometers of taiga mountains, marshes, and tundra into the massive, unexplored interior of central and eastern Siberia. Crucially, this enormous undertaking was accomplished not by the Tsar's official military, but almost entirely by mercenary Cossacks. These were autonomous, warlike military communities originating from the largely ungoverned borderlands along the Don and Dnieper rivers, known for their self-governance and frequent defiance of Moscow's direct orders. While their rebellious spirit was a perpetual irritation to the central government, the Cossacks' formidable military skill and unique adaptability in the harsh terrain made them essential. Free from strict military discipline and lacking regular government pay, they were directly incentivized to finance their operations through the violent plunder and extraction of wealth from the local populations. This mechanism institutionalized the systematic use of brutal extortion, massacre, and enslavement against the native peoples. Throughout the early 17th century, the Cossacks maintained a furious pace, securing new territories roughly the size of the modern-day Netherlands year after year. Native groups such as the Selkups, Tungus, and Yakuts quickly succumbed to the power of the Tsarist regime, tragically unable to mount a sustained, unified defense against the Russian advance. The most immediate explanation was the technological dominance provided by the Cossacks' gunpowder weaponry. However, the deeper, more tragic cause was demographic. At the dawn of the 17th century, the Tsardom of Russia's population stood at roughly 10 million. Siberia, in painful contrast, hosted perhaps no more than 300,000 widely dispersed people, scattered across a landmass 54 times the size of Great Britain and fragmented by countless languages and cultures. Furthermore, the conquest initiated a biological disaster. The rapid introduction of Old World diseases against which the native peoples had no natural immunity. Smallpox alone proved devastating, tragically eliminating over 80% of the Tungus and Yakut populations. When all these compounding factors are considered, the striking historical echoes are undeniable. Russia's conquest of its Wild East and the United States' conquest of its Wild West were two iterations of the same imperialist template, utilizing disease and military superiority to expand their respective empires across continental scales toward the Pacific Ocean. As the Cossacks violently opened the taiga, a massive flow of Russian colonists followed immediately. By the start of the 18th century, Russian settlers already accounted for over 50% of Siberia's total population, a figure that continued its sharp ascent as massive migration intensified. Settler colonialism was rigidly organized around a vital network of ostrogs, wooden fortresses strategically positioned on the riverbanks to project military and administrative control over the surrounding indigenous peoples. Most Russian newcomers were poor peasants searching for land. However, many were exiled criminals, political dissidents, and military prisoners forcibly sent into exile. This practice established a dark, enduring Russian tradition of Siberian deportation that would continue for centuries, up to the regime of Stalin. The Russian Orthodox Church followed the state, with its clergy frequently expressing shock at the lawless behavior of the Cossacks and the pagan beliefs of the indigenous groups. Priests attempted to civilize the unruly Cossacks and convert the pagans, but success was limited. The Cossacks continued their drinking, brawling, and plunder, while the natives generally adopted Christianity only outwardly, continuing their private animist traditions when unobserved. While Russians successfully introduced agriculture to parts of Siberia, the regional economy remained utterly dominated by the immensely lucrative fur trade. Today, a premium sable coat can easily command a price above $20,000 internationally. Its value was even higher in the 17th century, when a single sable pelt in prime condition sold for over 10 times the annual earnings of an average peasant family. By the end of the 17th century, the Siberian fur trade was a global phenomenon, supplying wealthy markets in Western Europe, Persia, and China. The immense revenue generated by this trade directly subsidized Russia's wars in Europe, most famously when Tsar Peter the Great declared a state monopoly on sable furs to fund the enormously expensive Great Northern War against the Swedish and Polish-Lithuanian empires. The Russians obtained these valuable furs primarily from the indigenous Siberian nations, who were forcibly subjected to a mandatory tribute of valuable animal skins paid to their nearest ostrog. This systematic extortion racket, known as yasak, placed immense destructive pressure on traditional native ways of life, compounded by the violence routinely inflicted for failing to meet the quota. Mirroring the Cossacks. Russian frontier governors were typically unpaid by the central government and were expected to nourish themselves financially through what they could ruthlessly extract from the natives, thereby escalating the fur quotas and institutionalizing severe indigenous exploitation. This mistreatment was not confined to state agents. Thousands of peasants who abandoned their farms to seek fortune as independent fur hunters, known as promyshleniki, also terrorized the locals. When these adventurers failed to secure their own pelts, they frequently resorted to kidnapping indigenous women and children, holding them for ransom and demanding a single sable pelt each for their return. As Russia drove its territorial claims deep into Asia, its path inevitably brought it into direct, major conflict with the world's most powerful empire at that time, the Qing dynasty of China. Following the conquest of the Ming dynasty in 1644, the Manchu emperors of the Qing began a powerful expansion north into the Amur River region, leading to a military confrontation with the Russians. The Qing proved to be a formidable adversary. They were militarily superior to the small, disease-weakened communities the Cossacks had been used to fighting, commanding a massive professional gunpowder army. In 1685, a Qing force comprising 6,000 men and 100 cannon destroyed the vital Russian ostrog of Albazin on the Amur River. The Russians quickly rebuilt the fortress the following year and, through determined fighting, managed to withstand a renewed Qing invasion force 10 times its size. Following this costly stalemate, representatives from both empires finally met to negotiate a stable boundary. The resulting 1689 Treaty of Nerchinsk compelled Russia to abandon the rebuilt Albazin Ostrog and formally cede the left bank of the Amur River, while the Qing, in a diplomatic compromise, relinquished their claims around Lake Baikal. With the border secured, the Russians focused on exploring the Pacific coast and the remote Kamchatka Peninsula. This wild region was home to the Koryaks, Itelmens, and Chukchis, ancient peoples who had inhabited eastern Siberia since the Ice Age, and whose cultural lineage connected them to the ancestors of the Native Americans who crossed into North America over 10,000 years ago. Russian records frequently noted the exceptional martial prowess of these Far Eastern tribes. They fought in heavy lamellar armor made of whale skin, reinforced with bone and antler plates, constantly raiding each other for slaves and reindeer herds. Despite their fierce independence, the Cossacks eventually subjugated the natives of the Far East after 1697, cleverly exploiting the existing divisions among the fragmented clans. The Cossacks then immediately enforced the yasak and enslaved the women and children of any clan that failed to meet the mandatory fur quota. This sustained cruelty, ironically, created a unified resistance. It brought formerly warring clans together against the relentless Russian menace. By 1706, the Koryaks, Itelmens, and Chukchis had simultaneously launched widespread open rebellion. They successfully surprised and destroyed multiple Cossack ostrogs, seizing the muskets, which they quickly learned to utilize. By 1729, the brutal Russian campaign was entrusted to the notoriously barbaric Major Dmitry Pavlutsky, who implemented terror tactics, including presiding over the mass slaughter and enslavement of Chukchi women and children, to crush the aboriginal resistance. By 1741, the Itelmens were largely defeated, but the Koryaks and Chukchis continued to fight. Over 6,000 kilometers away in St. Petersburg, the Senate under Empress Catherine issued a chilling decree for the total extirpation of the Koryak and Chukchi people. ordering their complete ethnic cleansing. But these tribes refused to submit. They fought back fiercely, famously capturing and beheading the despised Major Pavlutsky in 1747. Ultimately, exhausted by the ceaseless Russian aggression and a catastrophic smallpox epidemic that halved their population, the Koryaks finally capitulated to the Russian crown in 1757. However, the Russians were forced to abandon their official genocide plan against the Koryaks due to the tremendous cost of their sustained, ferocious resistance. The Chukchis, astonishingly, were never fully subdued. Despite Russian declarations in the 18th century that all of Siberia was conquered, the Chukchis never paid the Yasak tribute. Their territory in the Arctic Circle was simply too remote, and their population too fiercely determined to be permanently held. The Chukchis only accepted de facto Russian rule after the Revolution of 1917, making them the unique Siberian people to never be militarily defeated by the empire of the Tsars. By the 18th century, Russia had successfully brought the vast majority of North Asia under its control, confirming its status as the world's largest continuous land empire. Territorial expansion and consolidation continued for another 200 years. Key regions like Amur, Tuva, and Outer Manchuria were subsequently seized from a weakened Qing dynasty China after 1858, as was the island of Sakhalin, which was later partitioned with the rising Empire of Japan. In these final territories, native groups like the Nivuks and Oroks suffered terribly under continued Cossack violence. The Ainu people of Hokkaido, Sakhalin, and the Kuril Islands, in particular, faced colonization from two powerful nations, Russia and Japan. Today, the indigenous peoples of Siberia make up only about 5% of the region's population, which is now overwhelmingly ethnic Russian. Major cities such as Omsk, Novosibirsk, and Vladivostok firmly establish Russia's permanent presence beyond the Urals, now physically connected to the European heartland by the vital Trans-Siberian Railway. Yet, the original natives of Siberia persist. They have endured and outlasted the brutal Cossacks, who centuries ago tried to exterminate them, surviving the cultural Russification policies of the 19th century, the massive political upheaval of the Russian Revolution, and the devastating Soviet collectivization policies which further destroyed their traditional way of life. Despite all these existential threats, indigenous Siberians fought loyally alongside every Soviet nation during the Great Patriotic War against Nazi Germany. As of this documentary's release, the indigenous peoples of Siberia continue to face an uncertain and challenging future under Vladimir Putin's authoritarian regime, where activists are silenced and indigenous men are disproportionately conscripted as frontline soldiers in the illegal invasion of Ukraine. While the occupied nations of Central Asia and Eastern Europe gained their independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the indigenous nations of Siberia did not. Indeed, the complex, brutal, and enduring legacy of Russian colonization remains an active, relevant, and ongoing historical force to this very day. If you want to fully understand the deep historical forces that forged the modern world, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next definitive historical analysis. Please like, comment, and share. It greatly supports our ability to continue animating and sharing these important, untold histories.